Welcome everybody to another episode of Super Paranormal Chronicles. And today I am delighted to have Jesse Berkey with me, who is a presenter from Project Afterlife. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to the time we get to spend together.
Absolutely, and it's really good the fact that you are the first person that I've actually spoke about the afterlife to. So I'm really going to be drilling you on some of the questions. Hopefully, we've got some really cool answers. So
Yeah,
can you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself before we get into the episode itself?
sure. So I have been in the emergency services field for 22, 23 years. I got started all the way back in 2003 as a firefighter, and I went to paramedic school in 2006. I was promoted to a field training officer around 2012, which means I got to train other paramedics to be in charge. And then in 2019, I was promoted to lieutenant, and currently I'm in the process for promotion to captain. So the scope of my influence has varied over the last 22 years, but it's been a very rewarding time. You know, the career is full of challenges and rewards. I've gotten to experience a lot of patient interaction, a lot of patient experiences, and I've loved it.
That's really cool. And like I say, as we were talking offline, yeah, you and I have both got a lot in common with me being like a firefighter and paramedic as well. So, yeah, even though we're in a different part of the world, the jobs are pretty much the same that we're both experienced.
Yes.
And yeah, so you've got a nice sideline, or you had a nice sideline called Project Afterlife. So, how does a firefighter stroke paramedic get involved with a TV show about the afterlife?
That's a great question. So, it's got a little bit of a backstory there, as you can imagine. Back in 2010, 2011, everybody who knows me knows that my faith is a big part of my life and a big motivator to why and how I do the things that I do. And I was beginning to experience a lot of inner healing and a lot of transformation just in the way that I thought about myself, that I thought about others, and began to really progress to a level of maturity in all areas, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all areas of maturity that really helped me to be a more enjoyable person to be around. And kind of as a natural result of that, I began to be open to speaking words of encouragement to the patients that I would encounter, to praying for them with their permission, and just to involve my faith in work that I did, which was generally a newer concept for me personally. And so I began to kind of take down that barrier with a lot of really, really fascinating results. And out of those experiences, I wrote a book called Life Resurrected: Extraordinary Miracles Through Ordinary People. And I self-published that book. And about a year later, there's a guy named Johnny Clark that got a hold of that book. And he told me that he was producing a documentary called Dead Racer. Now, there were a few testimonies in Life Resurrected, or there are a few testimonies in Life Resurrected of me praying for people who had died. They were in cardiac arrest, their heart had stopped, they were dead. And I had a chance to do any treatment or interventions, or only pray, they came back. They experienced spontaneous circulation with breathing, and the heart started beating again. And so I wrote those things down in the book, and Johnny Clark got a hold of that, and he wanted to produce a documentary kind of chronicling not only just people being raised back from the dead, but everything that kind of that entails, all circumstances and what the individuals walk through and all that. So we over the next 2 years we produced that documentary, and after that was complete, we got a phone call from a production company called Screaming Flea, and they wanted to sell the concept of Dead Razor to a network, and So we gave them permission to do that. And there's a Discovery-owned network called Destination America who ended up purchasing that, and they created a show called Project Afterlife. And so in 2015-ish, we entered into production for Project Afterlife, and yeah, it was a wild ride.
I can imagine. And yeah, I know the banter that goes on in a fire station, firehouse, and an ambulance station. So you must have got some banter from some of your guys knowing that you were going to be on a TV show about the afterlife.
Yeah, they were kind of curious. I don't remember too much. It's not something that I really spent a lot of time talking about. I Over the course of my career, I've taken, effort to keep my home life and my work life separate, so that I don't take my work home with me, and I don't take all, personal stuff into the workplace with me. But yeah, there were, of course, my crew knew that I was involved in a TV show, and especially for Dead Racer, we had Johnny Clark and his production team came out to the firehouse and took some B-roll and took some footage, some interview, and some stuff like that to put into the documentary. And so, yeah, there was some general interest, but nothing too crazy. But you know how Firehouse banter is. So,
Oh, for sure, 100%. So yeah, you've said to you already that you've got like a religious background. So being on a TV show that deals with the afterlife, did you find that there was any conflicts between your religious beliefs and what you were asked to do or wanted to talk about on the show?
well, there were certainly some times of tension, and I have found I underwent a pretty big deconstruction is such a buzzword these days when you talk about faith and faith-based growth and in that kind of genre, in that kind of realm. But I experienced a revolution in my own relationship with God and how I thought about God's character and nature back in 2009 through. I mean, there's even stuff happening today that it's just kind of the way that it is. But I began to let go of such intensely strict doctrine that would conflict with anybody's personal experience. So I tend to hold things more with an open hand. So if somebody tells me one of their experiences and that doesn't mesh with my traditional understanding of what the afterlife is, it's okay with me. And thank goodness at that time, because so often we hold on to these strict religious beliefs and these doctrines that if somebody tells you something that doesn't quite line up, it creates a lot of anxiety, it creates a lot of fear because we tend to hold on so tightly to those things. But I found that the Bible is relatively silent on what happens when we die. Uh, what is hell? What does that look like? The the Bible is pretty silent on that fact or that whole category. And so what we've come to believe is just there's just leaps, they're just interpretive leaps that we don't really know for sure. And so who am I to say that somebody can't experience a state of purgatory, or who am I to say that somebody can't experience a place of darkness or go to a place of light? My foundation is in who Jesus is to me and what he means to me, and there's certain things that are true to me, but outside of those central critical issues, I tend to hold a lot of that with open hands. And so it doesn't scare me, if somebody has a experience that is kind of out of the box.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because yeah, obviously everybody knows that you've got multiple religions and everybody has their own idea of what that particular religion is. So like yeah, let's just go on a side note for 1 second. Like yeah, demonology for most people is mainly the Catholic Church, but other religions will have their own kind of demonology, so to speak, but they call it different things. So yeah, the fact that you're open is quite a sensible, rational explanation, and it's nice to have that kind of approach rather than go, no, what I believe in is the truth, and nobody can change my mind. At least you've got that open-handed approach, and that's good to hear. With all the troubles that are going around in today's world, that you open arms to everybody that approaches, so to speak.
Sure. And and it helped me interview people for Project Afterlife because I wasn't trying to lead them toward any particular answer or way of explaining things that would line up to a traditional understanding of the afterlife or anything like that. It helped me to allow people to tell their story. And I found that when talking with people who don't share the same faith that I do, it helps me there too because it doesn't. If somebody asks a question, I don't. It doesn't make me afraid. It doesn't create anxiety, and so
Yeah.
it's just a benefit all around.
And like I say, yeah, I love hearing about that kind of stuff. But yeah, let's go on to Project Afterlife. First episode, like if you've not been in front of a camera before, it must have been a little bit like nerve wracking. But how did you approach that first episode, knowing what the subject was about, and did you have to prepare yourself in a certain way, or how did you move forward, getting ready for that first episode?
Yeah, so the production team they looked for. I believe we had 12, and it was a 6 episode season, and we had 12 stories. And we did two. The episodes were an hour long, and we did two stories in each episode. And so they sent us the production company. They sent us the background information on the case and what had happened, and the unique element that there were a number of things that tied the stories to each other across all 12, which was really fascinating. But each one of them had somebody praying for them to come back. After they had died, they had somebody praying for them to. So the element that the production company wanted to see. Does prayer matter? And so all 12 had that. So we got all that information. We got what happened. We got who was praying for them. We got all of that kind of information. So we familiarized ourselves with that, and then we met the people who had the experiences, and they set it up as it was a very laid back shoot. They were When they wanted to do real focused interviews, they took them into a production room and they did their thing. But when we were interviewing them, it was laid back. It was open air, and we just encouraged them to talk and share their story. So yeah, if you haven't done that before, I had a little bit of media experience before that, but it was really interesting to see how those kind of shows come together.
And would you say that, because I know that in the episodes there was four of you doing the presenting, and some of you only did certain episodes. So would you say that you came away from those episodes with a more knowledge, or how? What was your feelings after you doing your particular episodes on, you know, near death experiences or out of body experiences, whatever you want to call it? How did you kind of like feel after you'd finished your particular episodes?
I think that in some ways it was a mixed bag because some of their experience didn't exactly, and I know that we had talked about being open-handed with. I was pretty comfortable with that, but some of it I was still learning. Some of their experiences kind of, I mean, it was out of the box, and so there was a little bit say, "Wow, you experienced," and when they experience something that's out of the box, like walking through a garden and reaching down and touching a river and hearing a voice in the background, and like all of these different experience after death experiences that they had, you have to sit there and you're like, well, do I do I believe them or are they a liar? And I have no indication that they're lying. I have no reason to suspect that they're sitting here lying to me. So what's the alternative? You had the experience. You're the one. You have to choose to believe it. And so I walked away from that with no answers really. Like there weren't there weren't very many answers. There was just a there were different experiences, but there were different threads that connected each one that were consistent. A warm, a peaceful presence. And these were people that were they. Some of them had a background in Christianity. Some of them had turned away from that and they didn't have any background in that. And I say Christianity because that's just kind of where the show was kind of bent towards since they had somebody praying for them. But a couple of them had different religious experiences in the past, and but there were just a consistent, there was a consistent, just warm presence, comforting presence that they had encountered. And so that part was comforting when I came out of it. But yeah, it was very interesting.
So, for those that people that don't know, is there actually a difference between an out of body experience and a near death experience?
Well, I would say that probably one leads to the other. I would say that there's a lot of science out there. I had read a lot of articles at that time about near death experiences and what the brain can do, and uh, so I would say that a near death experience would lead to an out of body experience, and I what we experienced talking to these people was that their hearts had stopped and they were for all intents and purposes clinically dead, and they had these experiences where they were away from their bodies. And so somebody prayed and they came back and they woke up against all odds that baffled doctors, and nobody knows what to do with anything like that. And so what do you call it? I mean, I think the general scientific community would want to call that a near death experience. Is it near death? I don't know. It's like we could argue that fact. Like I would say they were totally dead. I mean, you're about as near dead as you can get if your heart's gone. So
Yeah, for sure. And like I say, both of us having kind of like a medical background, yeah, putting it bluntly, we know when someone's dead. Yeah, we have our own checks. For someone to then come back and tell you what they experienced, for that individual, that must be a life changing situation to know that they've seen the light, so to speak, or they've, like you say, they've touched that water in that river or walked across it, and then to come back into reality. How do you think that, or can you tell me how individuals have changed after having such an experience like that?
Yeah, there was a marked change in them. Obviously, I didn't know them before they had the experience, but they would tell us what their life was like before they had this experience, and the majority of them they weren't very happy people. There's drug addiction, there was crime, there was a lot of different things that we can sometimes find ourselves mixed up in. And so there were definitely things that were hard, and some of them weren't doing a very good job at managing. But after the experience, when we got to meet them, it would you would be hard pressed to try to discern that about somebody or to judge that about somebody based on the way that they talked, and they themselves put a lot of language to how this experience has changed them forever. There was one case, I believe that she was on the very last episode. Her name was Valerie, and I mean you can watch her story if you go to Amazon Project Afterlife, and you can watch her story. And she broke every she was involved in a traffic crash, and she broke just about every bone in her body and bled out on scene. And she barely had a pulse when they finally cut her out of the car, and she died. And they worked her for about 45 minutes. We're about ready to give up, and she came back. It's like, and she talks about that after that experience. She wrote a book, and she started speaking at different events, and so her life was completely changed, and her
Yeah,
experience changed her. And so I don't know where any of these people are today, because we know that you have to be committed to a lifestyle of change, but those were definitely catalysts for a significant change in their lives.
that is crazy. Yeah, like I say, both of our experiences. Yeah, if you're being cut out of a car wreck, like yeah, you're in a bad way. And for someone to actually come back after bleeding out, it's like, whoa, hang on a minute, like boom, mind blown.
Yeah.
So, do these people have similar out of body experiences? Like, do they all see a bright light, or as you mentioned before, do they all have like a relaxed, comfortable sensation? How did it differ from case to case?
So there was definitely a consistent. I believe in, not only was the prayer for them something that tied them all together, but all of them had an experience with a warm presence that brought them peace that was a greater level of peace than they ever had experienced before. And kind of regardless of what the other surrounding circumstances were, they knew that they wanted to be with this presence, even if they didn't really know what to call it in the moment. Although I believe that most of them had said, we understood it to be God, this presence that gave us a peace that we had never experienced before, and so that was something that had tied um, every single one of the stories together. Now, I believe I recall the first episode that I did. It was a middle-aged guy. He was, I don't know, 40, 45, and he had started having chest pain a day or so before. He ended up going to the emergency department, and he went into cardiac arrest in the waiting room in the emergency department, and they could not break this guy's arrhythmia. They shocked him 17 times and nothing. And so they unhooked all of the equipment and pronounced him. And a few minutes later, a nurse comes back into the room and he starts moving. And he's he's awake. And and he describes his experience as a white light, a presence, a warm presence, and I believe that he had said he he was given a choice on whether or not he wanted to come back, and he chose that he wanted to come back. And it was right after that his heart started beating again, and he had a return of pulses. And so, like, yeah, not everybody experienced all of those elements, but all of them experienced the warm presence and a connection to something greater than they've ever known in their existence. And so,
With having sort of like, oh, just speechless then. With having a medical background, and you've got the religious background as too. Like, I'd be perplexed. Yeah, for that to happen and me to be in that environment, I'll be going like, yeah, I'll be expecting to see like the white sheet behind you with the two holes in it, going like, what's going on here? So to ask a question for you to have two hats on, what do you think happened as a medical person, and then what do you think happened as a religious person?
well, as far as the after they had died and what caused them to come back,
Yeah,
I you know
I told you it
I
wasn't going to be easy.
yeah, well, I think that I think that it's hard to take off in those kind of events, like where there's no explanation, there's no great explanation scientifically, medically, to explain, or pathophysiology, why this person came back. It's a medical miracle, what they call it, the
Yeah,
catchphrase or the buzzword. And so in those cases, I have no medical, like, my professional medical provider hat is obliterated. Like, I have no answer for that. All I have in that case is what I believe to be true about my faith. And I believe that miracles are for today. I believe that God can heal. I believe that God can raise from the dead. So I believe those things. And so that's what I fall back on, that God's love is so great for his people that in some cases he will move on behalf of them to heal and to even raise from the dead. And so when all the natural when there's no natural answers, I think we have to fall back onto whatever we believe to be true about God, or a
yeah,
higher power, or whatever that happens to be for somebody.
that's a great answer. You should be a politician. So because it's really interesting to know, sort of like, yeah, I don't want to be in that position where I'm having a near death experience. However, I wonder from that individual what the turning point was. You said that people got asked if they want to return or not. Obviously, if they said no, then the body would stay deceased. So obviously, and you may have spoken to these individuals about this, they may have decided that they want to come back for a specific reason. Yeah, they haven't finished their role on Earth, or yeah, they've still got unfinished business, that kind of thing. So, what do you think was the deciding factor for them to actually, if they did speak to the higher being, on their
Hmm.
decision to come back rather than to say stay deceased, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that with one of the greatest mandates that we're given through the Bible, through Jesus, was go out and make disciples. Go out and make disciples of all nations and teach them to follow in my ways. And so, if these people are connecting with a higher power, the God of the Bible, then if they feel like if the higher power is asking them to come back, or if they want to come back, or and telling them that if they do, there's so much good that they can still deposit into the world and pour out into the people around them, then there is a greater calling than just themselves as individuals. Sure, they could stay in paradise, they could stay with God, and that's it. But the undertone of the biblical narrative and the story of Jesus is more about community. And so if they felt a calling or a mandate that they to go and continue to pour into the world, then that is a higher calling than just getting everything for yourself. And so and of course this is speculation, into the motives and the desires of these people's hearts. But that could be certainly be one of them, to where they felt like they still had or they could take their story now and be a great influence to bring people together instead of pulling them apart, and to let them know that there's something out there that loves them intensely, that they can begin to run toward, instead of withdrawing into themselves, and instead of wounding other people. So that could be one motivating factor, one reason. Another one could be, you know to come back and actually pursue a relationship with God or the higher power. And not all of these people had relationships with a higher power or God. And so if there's a consequence of separation, if the choice is to eternally, at the end of our experience on this earth, if the choice is to be eternally with that presence or separated from that presence, then, I mean, how merciful and gracious is that higher power to give them an opportunity to go back and actually start living their lives for self-sacrificial love, or to start to bring people together, to begin to stop wounding other people, so that they can actually have a relationship with this higher power, and not be eternally separated. So those are just a couple of the reasons that came to the forefront of my mind.
See, I love catching people off guard by asking them really random questions, and like, oh, hang on a minute, I need to think about this one. So, with regard to the people that you had on the show, you mentioned about the girl that was in a car wreck, but do any other of the subjects stand out to you as being a remarkable near death and then come back to life experience?
Yeah, we talked about the traffic crash, and then the guy who got shocked, 17 times. That was certainly that guy was pronounced, and the physicians left the room, and the nurse called the doctor back in the room because she noticed that he had a heartbeat again, and then that doctor called another doctor back into the room, and they were all freaking out at that place. So that was a wild experience. But yeah, there were other stories. One was a Native American who had died, I believe, of a drug overdose on a reservation, and his experience was a little bit darker. But he also had an experience with a warm presence, or something that he wanted to pursue. And so when he came back, that was certainly a catalyst for him to start changing the way he experienced life and the way that he was being experienced by others, to pursue healing and whatnot. But each one of the 12 cases, I mean, they're just remarkable stories. Uh, Not all of them had as many elements as, the traffic crash, or the heart attack guy, or the drug overdose, but all of these people had death experiences, and then an after death experience that will encourage you and challenge you. And so it was just a great mix of people.
So you've done, like you say, you've wrote a book on this, but do you find, or have you heard of people that have had a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, but had kind of negativity rather than a white light, a peaceful environment. Are you aware of any times when it's been negative rather than peaceful?
We did not talk to anybody who had had an overtly negative, hopeless experience. Every one of the 12 experiences were hopeful. They were encouraging. There was some thread of encouragement, even with the guy who died of the drug overdose, who found himself in a little bit of a darker arena as far as the ambient or the environment that he was in. There was still an encounter that was full of hope and purpose and warmth and light. And so, no, we did not talk to anybody who had just a negative experience. I know that there's some testimonies out there that have been written to where their experience was pretty ugly, but I can't. It's hard for me to speak to some of that because we didn't talk to anybody like that.
Okay. How common would you say that near death and out of body experiences are? Obviously America's a big place, Canada's a big place, then you've got Europe, etc., around the world. You've just done one series of 12 people. Yeah, it'd be great to see some more, to hear some more of these fantastic stories. But how common do you think this really is?
Well, as far as after death experiences, I think that every single person, and this is my faith bias, but I think that everybody has an after death experience. Everybody who dies is going to have an after death experience. Now, how common is it for them to come back? Uh, great question. I I have no idea. How many people out there are having after death experiences and then um, coming back to talk about it. Probably more. It's probably more than what we would anticipate or guess, and we're just not hearing too much about it. It would be. It's not something that would be easy to talk about because I'm sure that a lot of these people who are having these experiences aren't really sure what to do with them. Yeah. How do I share this in a way that doesn't make me seem or sound crazy? What if I'm a Christian who had an experience that doesn't line up with my theological or my doctrine? Or what if I'm a Hindu or a Muslim who has an after death experience that doesn't line up with my understanding or what I've been taught in religion for my entire life. What are you supposed to do with those things? That would be extremely hard.
That's the $1 million question. Okay, so yeah, we've done the episodes of Afterlife. You've wrote the book about it. You're going for your captain examinations. What's next for Jesse Berkey?
Well, as far as my professional career, I think it's going to be another 8 years or so of interacting with emergency scenes and helping people along their worst days. I don't know if there may be another book or two in me at some point. Not really sure about that. Every now and then I do a speaking event and talk about different things, mostly from a faith-based perspective. So I'm doing some of that, and continuing to raise a family. And so those are the things that I'm looking at in my present day and in the short-term future.
That's awesome. Well, Jesse, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You've enlightened me on some of the fantastic stories. So thank you for coming onto the podcast. It's been absolutely great, and I hope the listeners enjoy it as much as what I've done, asking you some really tricky questions.
Yeah, it was a
So
lot of fun.
awesome. So all I can say now is thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day. And hopefully we'll talk again very soon.
Yes, sir. I appreciate
Thank
it. Thanks
you.
so much.
Take care. Bye bye.